So about 2.5 years ago, I made a video by the title of 4 areas that could revolutionize the personal computing experience. And that's a part of my vision when it comes to enabling computation systems of the future. I sincerely believe that this is actually 5 areas, and I sincerely believe that development in all of these 5 areas plus other areas like virtual reality and augmented reality are going to be a core part when it comes to enabling computation systems of the future. And one of the things I've been and I've spoken about a bunch of different things in that video, as well as other content that I put out, and how I classify that discovery will lead to newer ways of experiencing content. And it was it's beyond content at that point, because it's going to be more about experience versus content. But this video is about conversational AIs, and it's an interesting topic which I know nothing about, and I haven't done any research here. And I'm going to try and do a brain dump of how I think a conversational AI could be powered. I'm not going to get into topics like test or whether like machine-based cognition and all of these topics or subtopics. I'm not going to get into those conversations. I'm only posing the simple question of what would it take to enable conversational AIs from the perspective of an uneducated guess. Like I said, I haven't done any research and I know nothing about the space. But before I get into start doing the assumptions of how I think something like this would be powered, I'm just trying to get the distractions away from, good distractions, but away from me. And before I think how something like this could be powered, let me just start with one of the use cases or part of the vision, and this goes back to the kind of content I consumed as a child, or even going into my teenagers. And I used to watch a show called Jonny Quest, where the lead character named Jonny, his father's name was Benton Quest, who was a scientist slash researcher into, he researched a bunch of different things, but the government would contract some of the work out to Benton Quest, and without going into all the details related to the characters, Race Bannon and Benton Quest and whatnot, there was a couple other characters, but this was the remake during the 90s of the original series, which I haven't seen a lot of. But to focus on the specific topic of computation systems, with a core focus on human-computer interaction, Benton Quest was ahead of the curve when it comes to computation systems and gadgets. We're talking about handheld devices with rich multimedia capability. Talking about a couple other things, but keeping it focused to computation systems and again human-computer interaction. It was very interesting how you used to interact with computers. There was some kind of a local database with most of the world's information stored within it. So this is kind of early days of internet. So these ideas weren't really that mainstream. But he could place his hand over some kind of a device, if memory serves me correct. And I think he could invoke commands using natural language. So he would just talk, and the machine would query that data and bring the results back. So there's a couple of complex things going on. I've actually made a blog post about this, which may not be that well thought out. Now that I kind of look back at some of my previous blog posts, it's more of a brain dump than doing the structured work of refining that thought. Yeah, that kind of goes back to that blog. What I'm trying to get to though right now is that I'm trying to get to a couple of things. I'm trying to think of how something will be powered beyond the search engine, which would lead into discovery and then eventually experiences. But it would also be something that computes information rather than just scrawling information repositories and bringing them back in some kind of a hierarchical fashion, which is what Google pretty much does. It scans the part of the web that it has been able to index and scan and index, crawl, scan and index, and then it through, like, I don't know how Google's algorithms really work. It's able to present that information to the users, and the user's interaction also has a role to play when it comes to the grading and the ranking of these repositories. Wolfram Alpha works a little bit differently from what I understand. I don't really know how it works, but instead of crawling the web, maybe it does crawling as well, but the system actually computes information. So when you pose a question, it computes the information that you're requesting, and however the system works, it generates the results on its machines and presents you the output that you're looking for. And it's more than just a search engine. It's a computing platform on the cloud. And I'm not going to get into all the other products offered by Wolfram because I don't know what all they offer. I just spent just a little bit of time tinkering with Wolfram Alpha over the years, and there's a bunch of different things you can do with that system. So probably too much of an information, spending like 7 or 8 minutes talking about this, making the segue into the topic of discussion and tying the chain back to the 4 or 5 areas that could revolutionize the personal computing and the computing industry in general. Today I just want to kind of, again, take a little bit of a time thinking about conversational AIs. So I've made references in the video that I have mentioned. I'm going to put a link to this video from 2.5 years ago as well. And I've made references to technologies like Viv.ai. But even if it's in its working state, I don't know where Viv is. I haven't looked at the developments in a while. I don't know if it's released and what's going on, if it's due for release. However, I must say that even when it's released, the way I understood it, it's not necessarily a conversational AI. You can do some complex querying. You can, instead of just doing a singular command or a query, you can combine a bunch of different queries and the machine would be able to execute upon that. But what I'm really trying to get to today is true conversations fluid conversations with machines. And there's a very complex talk. The way, even to an uneducated person like me, who doesn't know much about ontologies or natural language processing or different kind of chains or mathematical models, linguistics, not going to get into different languages and accents and whatnot, but even from the framework of a very bare bones rudimentary format, the challenge to get to a full-on conversational AI is a complex endeavor. And I made I've shared other thoughts about this. I don't know if I make a video or this in my notes, but oh yeah, I made a video about books talking to each other, and in that video I hypothesized that in order to be able to usher a reality like that, you need a couple of things, and one of them would be cog models, and how cog models would need to evolve in rich environments, and as they do that, you then have a reality whereby books in theory would be able to talk to each other. Seems too simplistic. It probably is too simplistic of an idea, but I'd like to borrow a little bit something from that metaphor or that framework, and in order to be able to power conversational AIs, I think in lab surroundings or settings this is already happening. So you have chatbots talking to each other. I don't know how much sense they actually make, but I think pretty much all neural networks start that way, biological or not. For now, biological neural networks, whether it's mostly due thanks to evolution and enablement of culture and society, have or maybe technology is just in this gradient or scale of technology is still in its very early stages. But what I'm trying to get to is that biological neural networks right now are more adept at a lot of information processing that is that powers the senses that our biophysical body and the mind, as well as the mind, need. Where I was going with the conversational AIs, I think again there are chatbots that you can set them up and they talk to each other. But I don't know, I haven't looked into this too much, but the information is passing back and forth, but I don't know over time how and to what degree the probabilistic model of these conversation and its quality, how it increases, and whether there is a somewhat of a difference when it comes to the quality. I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers, let alone to be able to make sense out of them. That being said, to get to the actual discussion, in order to be able to power something that looks like a true conversational AI, again, you need a couple of different things. And let's think about it this way. If there is a baby that's being born, actually, let's take a moment to go back. So, say the baby goes through the development stages in the womb, and there's a couple of different trimesters, and the development of the biophysical body is happening during this time. And as a result, like as a part of that process, the development of the brain is also happening with the enablement of the brain itself, the different hemispheres, obviously the neurons that power that biophysical construct. For now, there are no mental models to speak of, and pretty much all of this is driven by genetic code. I don't know much about genetics in order to be able to expand upon this thought, but it's quite remarkable how much information is packed in DNA. And this is the off-topic off-topic comment, or note. But if you look at a tree and how you put like a seed in the ground and it becomes this fully functioning, blossoming tree with all these intricate processes driving its operations on a cellular and other levels. And all this is driven by genetic code. It's pretty remarkable. Same goes for some kind of a species that's not plant-based or it's animal-based, insect or mammal or marine life, and it's all of its intricate machinery, the code that powers that machinery. So again, it's pretty remarkable that genetics can power such incredible beings, such complex beings in such a pretty much precise way is what I want to say, even though there's a lot of complex things going on. Precise from the perspective, like when I look at my body and I compare it to other human body, like from the perspective of this conversation, it's quite remarkable that there is genetic information encoded that makes my biophysical body of a particular range. So it's not like my nose can keep on growing, or this is a bad example, Pinocchio, or you know, my same with my forehead or my ears or my neck or my limbs, or any other expression or internal organs at that. There's the DNA has learned over time what works through trial and error, natural selection, and these traits are passed on through the genes. How there's some code driving these characteristics, at least in a biophysical sense, and potentially like there's some cognitive element to that as well. However, that's not the topic of this discussion or conversation. So there's something very rich going on from a genetic point of view that translates into these realities, and like it's about how DNA builds up from nucleotides and a thing that is DNA, and these like atomic structure and quarks before that, whatever comes before that, the particle world, and then there's the chain all the way to nucleotides and DNA-based pairs and how they come together form cells. I believe, I could be wrong, and there's different kind of cells, and how the cells then come together determines what kind of structure they're going to create, and then the function those cells would perform. So cells are quite unique in their the range of operations that they perform as well. The types, obviously, the types of cells, and then the range of operations they perform, and then how they come together. And again, there's a couple of different things how they all work together. So, so that was a top of the topic of the like a note on the side. So I don't think, coming back to the topic, I don't think there's anything in terms of a roadblock standing in the way of powering conversational AIs. It's this most simple way that I can think of doing something like this would be to patch up a collection of narrow AIs in a controlled environment. And as somebody does that, you just work on specific benchmarks in order to be able to do something like this. That being said, there is a whole clause of, in random order, ethical, moral, societal considerations to be made when it comes to the enablement of such a being. My views, which I don't necessarily enforce strongly or weakly at this point because I don't know anything about this area, is that whatever gets powered is a conscious being, and its rights should be granted and exercised. However, in a almost kind of like a schizoid sense, I at the same time do not enforce that view because I haven't thought about it as much. And I say this because enforcing that point of view, that and treating code as something sacred will just be, it's dogmatic, number one, and number two, it's regressive is the first one that comes to my mind from the perspective of that you're retarding technology deliberately just because the problem has not been defined in a richer context. Which kind of goes back to that age-old, I guess, age-old from the context of the past couple of decades, if not a couple hundred years, of as what actually constitutes as a conscious experience. Without touching on subjects like consciousness, the soul, the spirit, there's a bunch of different ways through which we have associated or attached meaning to the experience. And I'm no allegory to my company that I am running at the moment, like I'm not going to mention the name, but I'm just talking about this conversation on its own. But none of these things have been proven. This is my experience or belief, for lack of a better word. I do sense that there's something like maybe cognition, whatever we are experiencing right now, even if it's a collective hallucination and the brain is in a vat somewhere else, or like use that example. This is whatever's powering this experience, and however it gets powered, it is what we can at least sense, and perhaps we can model it in rudimentary forms when it comes to things like mice or cockroaches. I think those kind of brains have been modeled. I could be wrong. Just like more, lesser complex neural structures have been modeled in different architectures. So however you want to slice and dice it, that's being done or has been done. Oh, the honeybee. The honeybee's brain has been modeled. I think IBM researchers have been able to do that. Going back to the conversation about how, again, it would come about, how would something like a conversational AI will happen. Uneducated guess. You stitch a bunch of narrow AIs together, and again, you test the different benchmarks in order to be able to see which parameters need to be tweaked in order to be able to get to optimal output. Now, optimal output wouldn't exactly be in one quadrant or another. It wouldn't just be fluidity in random order or the actual precision through which some kind of response is garnered, for lack of a better word, because meaning can be subjective, and there are some things that are very, very binary in terms of a yes or no answer. But human conversations can be a lot more nuanced than just I think I could be wrong. But human conversations can be a lot more nuanced than just a string of binary inputs with a couple of either or statements attached in some form, shape, or fashion. So we're taking the steps in order to be able to power something like a conversational AI. I don't know anything about deep learning and what's going on in the labs in order to be able to expand more about this. I don't know about where I saw this, but I think Andrew NG, if that's how you say Andrew's last name, mentioned that conversational AI is maybe around the corner. I don't know what that means, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I don't know what the corner means. But at some point, we will witness the emergence of machines through machines that we could have full-scale conversations with. And the interesting thing, it depends how you structure it too. Maybe, but theoretically speaking, machines, the conversations with machines are going to be much more richer and deeper because you can add so many more levels of depth and nuance to the questions being posed. But so that's going a little deeper in the conversation. Again, the conversation, if the question is posed as when it comes to what powers a conversational AI, what would power a conversational AI? Well, a couple of narrow AIs stitched together in order to be able to perform that operation. Yes, but okay, if that is the correct, leading towards the correct answer, what would that look like is the question. How will that be manifested? Let's think about that a little bit deeper. What would you need on a bare minimum, bare bones basic in order to be able to power a conversational AI? Going back to the example about a baby. So when a baby is in gestation, the brain is developing, the neuronal structure is developing, the central nervous system is developing. Obviously, with the development of that system, which probably happens at some phase, I don't know when, of the development of the embryo, I don't know when exactly, but then you have development of limbs and whatnot. The limbs start. That's a very biophysical kind of movement. Like somebody could like zap specific portions of my muscles, and the limb movement would start. But then the baby is, I would call it a state change. The birth is a state change because you can have babies that are born, but they don't necessarily realize that they're born. So some kind of external stimuli has to be provided in order for that human biological baby being to recognize that it's born, and then it acts upon it, whether it's it's supposed to kickstart that process of breathing, which obviously the babies don't do in gestation, based on what I understand, because the nutrients are delivered through the umbilical cord. But like that process of breathing, like the lungs kick in, and this birthing process is official. It's kind of like it's official past the delivery, but like that's the thing, right? Like that's the baby has really arrived. Beyond that stage and getting into the actual discussion, the biophysical body starts latching on to things. Very interesting question. Why does that happen, right? There are actually other species that can perform specific functions from the get-go. I think crocodile babies do it, or specific turtle babies do it. Baby turtles. They are born on the coastline and they make the kind of the run towards the shoreline. What programs them to do that? Like, why don't they go in the opposite direction, or why don't they stay where they are born, or something else? There's got to be some programmed prior knowledge in their mind, in their brains, that makes them do what they do in order to be able to run towards the shoreline right after they're born. But that's a very interesting conversation. Like, how does the genetic code has that information encoded that certain beings perform certain actions or functions without having experienced them before, to the best of our knowledge. To my untrained eye, it looks kind of like a very binary conversation, that the knowledge, the information must be encoded in the genes in some kind of a trace memory, which gets transferred from generation to generation. It's not like a complete history, but it's enough so that certain functions can be had in order to be able to ensure the survival of the species. And the question, it opens up a host of other questions, which I'm not going to get into, but why do some species do it? Why don't others do it? Do all species do it on this planet at the very least? Do some variable degrees? Because if you look at a human baby, the human baby, even in the first couple of days of its development, has a tendency to do a couple of things that are that kind of put it on a path towards towards a path of sorts that is priming it already in order to be able to functional in this 3D landscape. So, well, the kicking and the movement of the limbs is already going on in the different trimesters. So, like the baby is already kind of building up, not just to get out of the space that it's in, but also to be functional in a I'm probably going too off topic, but to be functional in a 3D sense, in a 3D environment, because it would have to do that once it's born, in order for it to be in order to increase its chance of survival. When it comes to the ingestion of nutrients, obviously the umbilical cord is gone. The biophysical body needs energy, and the only way, for now, we don't have the ability to absorb electrons directly, but the way to absorb nutrients is through the intake of nutrition. And there's something, again, in the biology and the genetics that is like a latching movement. So whether it's because there's breastfeeding and the baby is like it knows how to latch onto stuff. I think from very, like, maybe the first couple of days. I could be wrong. I haven't done a lot of research for this video. So there's some embedded information there to do the latch on thing. The same with the bottle. This is the bottle. The baby just latches on. How? Like, the question is how would like a being that is not functioned in this environment before know to perform certain actions? Other actions are more kind of more biomechanical of our nature, where like the process of digestion is happening based on like how the internal gut and whatnot, these biophysical traits function. Whereas, and maybe these are all memories, and there's some other, maybe these are all interesting things we're going to find in the future. Where I was going with this example was that, and I've used this example in the other video that I made about books talking to each other, but in order for any kind of cog model to be efficient in any environment, you need a couple of base precepts or frameworks or models. And in light of the fact that these models exist and the being, the aware being, the conscious being operates in these environment and making use of these different models, that is how learning happens. I think, I'm not sure. So you need the environment, you need the ontological structure, and you need, what was the other one? I think there were three. I gotta review that video again, but you need the ontological structure at the back of your mind. You need the models, which is really an ontological structure of the model, and you need the environment. You need a rich environment in which that conscious being will there's a bunch of different ways this particular brain dump or conversation could evolve, but I don't see I'm gonna make another segue, and this is another series of thoughts that I've been thinking about, and I think the conversation around the development of artificial general intelligence is a bit misguided. That's my uneducated guess. There's a lot of fear mongering. There's irresponsible comments on part of people, which I'm not going to name, and this is bad for technology, and it's putting the risks first, which results into into a reality whereby all these damaging memes are already floating, and leads to retardation of technology and hurts the prospects of human civilization in the mid, short, and long run. That being said, there are different I guess, identities, for lack of a better word, at the different stage of their technological development, and there is a risk that a certain group, it could be anyone, it doesn't have to be from another part of the world, it could be from here, this part of the world, could be in your neighborhood, it could be anywhere. It could be that in order to want to close the gap, the technology gap, that some individual or group may make a mistake. So anyway, so what I'm trying to get to, without going to that conversation, I'm trying to put both of those things into a spectrum. There's a lot of possibilities in the middle. But generally speaking, I think the conversation is misguided. I think what's going to happen is, my views are biased, I think it's pretty inevitable that machine-based cognition is going to get powered at some point. And this cognition is going to be indistinguishable from human cognition on every realm. You can take any standardized or non-standardized test in order to be able to assess the validity of how that perceptive system operates. So you could have your IQ tests, your even emotional quotient related questions, and scenarios, or it's just asking questions along those lines, which is a deeper conversation in order to be able to quantify emotions, and then building that into a model so that a machine-based cognitive system would be able to understand, assess, feel, think, I don't know, not exactly in that order, and then come up with a response to the question being posed. And there's going to be all these different variables that you can get to when you tweak different things. It's kind of like thinking of Interstellar and TARS, and how Matthew McConaughey's character is like hacking TARS, or I forget if this was the other one, because there were two robots on board, at least two. And so you could do a lot of these things, and it's going to lead to different outcomes. But what I'm trying to get to is that I don't think there's anything stopping in the way of getting to a machine-based cognitive system, if it isn't here already. I think what's going to happen is that because reality is powered by certain constructs, so I mean, it's arguable the amount of energy that's actually required in order to be able to sustain or create a reality. I don't have a very good grasp of some of the, I don't know anything about physics in order to be able to think about these questions at all. But looking at the arc that the existing set of technologies are on is keeping a very rudimentary look at those trends. I do not see anything standing in the way of powering new worlds that are indistinguishable from this reality, whereby conscious beings could exist in that world. I'm mostly talking about virtual worlds, but you may also have the emergence of worlds on perhaps smaller scales. It's going to be different models, different models that are going to exist in those realms. So as these worlds exist and as they evolve, and some of them may evolve in a relatively small amount of time relative to our perception of time, and you can kind of think of this in terms of epochs. So their epochs are gonna could go really fast, because you can build and scale so much more effectively. So then the question then becomes about upper limits and how they exist in terms of information and saturation of information, and I'm thinking of in Kurzweilian terms at this point, going back to specific graphs from the singularity is near and different epochs, and kind of mapping that to how you have something like that in machine learning as well, because you have those runs and then you have epochs, and there's a couple other things. I forget, I took notes in a paper-based format. But anyway, so there's going to be upper limits to, I guess, unearthing new information, and not going to get into that conversation, but taking a step back, what I was trying to get to is, as these new worlds exist, there will be conscious beings in these new worlds, and there will be kind of gateways from one world to another. I guess a very rudimentary, almost a very crude analogy would be video games right now. So there's an entire universe of video games that has evolved in a very short amount of time. Say maybe, I don't know when the first Pong game was, or one of the first video games were introduced, but around 30 years? Something like that, 30 to 40 years, there's maybe 45 years. A lot of development has happened in 30 to 40 years in the realm of video games. You could say that it's the progression is exponential, because you have like 2D games like Pong, and then you're going into deep immersive gaming today, that if it wasn't for some variants like uncanny expression or pixelization and gradient and some physics leading again to the uncanny experience, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell the difference. So if you can extrapolate 15 years out, then it becomes very difficult to ascertain this reality from a virtual projected reality, whether in a game world or another world. But so that's the analogy I was looking with. Like, that's still a very crude analogy, because the construct through which user interaction with the agents in a virtual world happens right now is mostly hand coded and or is using a narrow set of AIs in order to be able to perform a narrow set of operations which lead to a narrow set of outputs. I'm just gonna check how much battery life I have left for my charger. No. So that's why it's a crude representation. Now, the switch would mean you just take some of these variables and you replace the hand-coded logic structures or operations and narrow set of AIs with richer models and richer models would lead to a richer set of possibilities, and you then incorporate elements from like how chaotic systems and non-chaotic systems function, and you build up different layers, and you have this translation going on in terms of one set of systems manifesting in a different reality and powering different set of realities. When you take all that and you put that in this world, this engine, then over a course of time, interesting things are bound to happen. Just like interesting things have happened in our dimension of space and time, which could just be one of the many slices of space and time in a universe that may whereby a lot of different possibilities could exist almost concurrently. I guess the mathematical equivalent would be something along the lines of sets. As the conversation conversation evolves past this point, because I don't know much about mathematics or physics, or I definitely don't know anything about quantum realities or other realities or dimensions in order to be able to wrap my mind around such constructs. Coming back to where I was going is, and what's going to happen is, there is going to be the development of these worlds, which will, if you were to experience it the way they were supposed to be experienced, there is no doubt in my mind that very rich environments could be powered in virtual reality, and some of them will be like human, modeled after human kind of surroundings, 3D and semi-familiar kind of evolution of materials leading up to structures that these conscious beings will create, and there's going to be different representation when it comes to life forms and how it's all going to be powered. And the interactions through the worlds will happen through portals, and I guess the difference would be, as opposed to just a single instance or even a collective, as in a distributed MMORPG, kind of like a reality, whereby you have a reality powered through the central. You can be distributed about, like, generally speaking, a shared kind of experience. I mean, there's still a kind of like a, if you kind of think about it conceptually, there is a sharing of information between those two systems. You've got this virtual system whereby conscious beings from this reality engage in this other reality, and say now you have some AI-based agents, robots in that reality. So you got like this human and these machines, kind of, for lack of a better word, doing things in this reality. And there is an exchange of information happening, even if it's just the translation of human movements and thoughts represented and translated into this world. But from the perspective of the evolution of conversational AIs and conscious agents, the flow of information is going to be that much more richer, and I kind of anticipate that people would want to spend more and more time in these worlds, at least in the mind, and this is going to evolve in a very interesting set of ways, with mostly developments around how memories are formulated, structured, and like it's going to be an interesting play there. Time and time dilation, and like how that kind of really works. I don't know how it works. Like the perception of time, and like how like that's encoded in memories. Like there's biophysical needs that may be powering that. So there's going to be some kind of an energy quotient when it comes to powering that reality. But in a future sense, that limitation could be overcome with some kind of augmentation, because you could just supply the necessary nutrients. Ideally, it would be non-invasive, but you have some kind of machine structure in a cyborgian sense, with the ability to be able to provide nutrients directly to cells, and in effect, that would be one way to kind of leapfrog this limitation. And if you do that, then time dilation coupled with memories, that would be a very interesting thing. I forget the name of the movie, but there were like these bioports, and you would attach them to your belly button. It's kind of weird, because I started with an example of the baby. I wasn't really thinking in this term. But you attach these bioports to your belly, I think, or maybe the back of your neck. I forget what it was. I forget the name of this movie, but then you would like enter this game world, and you would control things with your biopod. I could be wrong. The memory is a little hazy, no pun intended. But there was time dilation in this work of science fiction, whereby somebody could be in the game world for an extended time period, but only so much time would have passed by in their reality, but in their surroundings. So yeah, some interesting things could happen in that front, and there's going to be some interesting set of ethical questions that would have to be considered. There may be some extreme cases that are going to emerge with respect to uploading and downloading. So you could have a individual, and they may be spending, say, a lot of time in these worlds, and it's not that these worlds are not real, but like it depends on how certain technologies evolve, and if there isn't really a clean way to kind of like exit this biophysical body and like enter another cog state, and then you want to make the transition back. Right now there isn't a way to do that really cleanly or at all. There just isn't that framework. Like we're just doing, like we're starting to hear things about head transplants and 3D printing with biology, mind files, and a couple of things along these domains, mostly in the transhumanist domain. But there isn't really, like it takes time to mature and advance these technologies, as anyone would appreciate. And so anyway, so like, so the kind of scenarios that could exist is that somebody wants to switch to, say, another world, and it's, to our perception, it's a virtual world. And as some would argue, and perhaps it seems like a valid statement to make, when you have a reality, and it's like there exists conscious beings within this reality, and these beings, like they say they are conscious, they're able to pass any kind of a framework that like individuals and societies in this reality have come up with in order to be able to ascertain the mechanism of quantifying or deducing whether somebody is conscious or not on some gradient. I'm not playing with words. I'm saying, say, humans have a quotient for conscious experience, and so humans would judge each other based on this quotient, and I'm not getting into the extremes or sort of like the what if scenarios that somebody's IQ is on a very lower basis or like, you know, something like that. What I'm trying to get to is that, say, just there's a baseline, and that baseline is generally considered to be functioning and effective in society, and that's the baseline, and we give these set of tests to these beings, and these beings pass those tests and a lot of others, and we're able to have full-scale conversations with these beings, and maybe they're even sharing some information with us that could be beneficial to the human-machine civilization here. I think that at that point it's sufficient to say that that reality is inhabited by conscious beings, and then we need to work on ensuring that if those beings in effect have a dependency on some kind of a system that we inhabit, then we work together to respect that. I mean, 30 or 40 years out, this is not going to be a problem, but till that time, it may be. Because at the base, everything, I believe, requires energy, and to power a virtual reality, you would have that as a base on some scale, I'm thinking. Going back to that use case or scenario that I was mentioning in terms of the extreme cases, if somebody is spending a lot of time in the virtual world, and maybe they are in a relationship with somebody in that world, or maybe they have begun to appreciate and love the culture of that society, civilization, construct, whatever word you want to use, then again, there is no clean way to move information back and forth, and it would have to be some kind of a choice, a binary decision, and it doesn't have to be that way, is what I'm trying to get to. And I'm thinking of John Archibald Wheeler's participatory universe, and like just trying to appreciate the breadth of such a statement, or that vision, or that realization, whatever you want to call it. But maybe that's really what the universe is just a collective, shared, observed experience. So going back to the 5 areas of personal computing and how something like this will be useful for the human-machine civilization now and in the future, I think conversational AIs are going to play a tremendous role when it comes to advancing the prospects of our survival. Not just survival, but greatly extending the reach in a Kurzweilian sense again. Kurzweil uses the example of the stick, and like how we use the stick to get beyond the low-hanging fruit. And I think I'm not sure, that's his way of using a metaphor for displaying or showcasing that technology is that stick, and that's what technology has allowed us to do over time. And not picking and choosing, but conversational AIs would be part of that. Like it's in that category. However, it's also very distinct, and it reminds me of something somebody said a couple of months ago. Traditionally speaking, the development of technology has been kind of like a very mechanistic phenomena whereby, however you want to go back to, I wouldn't say the evolution of language is also a mechanistic phenomena, because I don't know much about linguistics and how it has played a part when it comes to the development of neuronal structures and capacities, and the development of the brain in general. But I would go to some of the other inventions in a biophysical format that humans have come up with. Like, seems like a very mechanistic set of inventions, and there's got to be some neurological correlate to as to why that has happened the way it has happened. The trend seems to be towards more precision and towards more miniaturization and more measurement. And what was I trying to get to? I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I'm totally losing my train of thought here. Thinking about something completely different. Thinking about buildings in Toronto. Found a park not too far from here, which was cool. Even if it was just to chill out and lie down in the sun for a little bit. Inventions, development of technology, precision, mechanistic. I need more tea. Oh yes, so what's different this time is that even though some of these worlds would have been powered by, you can kind of argue that these are simplistic models because it's just code, and like it depends on how it's powered, right? So if you've got you've got self-assembling nanostructures, and then you equip some of them with cog models, and they go on to evolve on their own and create their set of technologies and realities, and then it's maybe not going to be as rudimentary or simplistic, because they might evolve their own language and culture and their own ways of representing information and knowledge and whatever's going on there. But what I'm saying in this case is that how this development is different from all previous developments is that even though, again, the frameworks and the logic structures may not be as complex, the fact that there are beings that exist within these realities whereby they are able to perform on the same scale as humans on virtually, let's not use the word, on pretty much every scale posits that these are conscious beings. And that's what makes this development different from, I think, everything that has come before. And it's time to pause, think, and reflect about that reality. It's almost like coming in contact with an alien culture or a civilization, and it's important to ponder what will happen in that scenario. Maybe I should be careful and not use that analogy, because again, the fear kind of comes in, and the fear-based mongering could really hurt human prospects, terrestrial prospects, because it's going to be very difficult to get off this rock without advanced technologies. And if we don't do that, then we're just waiting for the next risk, the existential risk to do its thing, meaning what happened 60 million years ago, and at least 3 other times before that. No, sorry, 4 other times, because it happened 5 times, and many other times actually, because these are just the major cycles. Yeah, so I don't think that's a good choice. That's got a hard expiration date on it if you retard technologies. And I guess this is more of an art than it will be a science. And the initial conditions may impact, I think will impact. I gotta choose my words carefully here, because I'm talking about something I don't have a lot of experience in. But the initial conditions will impact future developments, and you've got to factor a lot of things in. And I think things should be defined in terms of gradients. And I also think there's a whole cluster of thoughts I have. I'm not sure, but subjugating a conscious set of beings to perform your manipulative or drudgery or like boring work, not being cognizant of their thoughts and feelings and emotions, is not a good thing. It could really be quite problematic because of a variety of reasons. So actually, but I think the gradient needs to be defined via which humans in existing and also future cyborgian sense, because again, in a Kurzweilian sense, as more time passes by, there's going to be less and less ways of distinguishing what is human versus what is a machine, and the actual definition of what is a human will be redefined, and an actual definition of what is a machine is going to be redefined, and is going to be merging as more and more time goes by. How this impacts what I was saying in terms of gradients is that there are ways, I think, of defining the reality through which you can benefit from these developments, and I think again it's going to exist in gradients, and the gradients meaning, so let's go into the more of a functional example at this point, but so we're going back to the 5 areas that will define or redefine computations systems of the future, with a core focus on human-computer interaction as the construct emerges via which humans can pose questions in any format, whether through natural language or through brain-machine interfaces. It's a query that's being made to that construct, and that construct doesn't have to be conscious, so to speak, in order to be able to return that query. I got to think a little bit about this, but I think there may be a way to even power a conversational AI without it being conscious. Yeah, I got to think about a bit more about that. It's going to make my brain hurt. But actually, the making of that comment posits the question that a lot of the conversations that we have as humans may not actually be conscious, without actually getting into the subjective argument of what is a conscious experience is. I think most of the conversations are unconscious. I'm not sure. And there's certain patterns that you can pick up on in order to be able to deduce the level of engagement that somebody is engaged in when it comes to the conversation. But the actual true test, I think, of something like this, I could be wrong, there could be other tests, is to if there was some kind of a way to take a look at the mental models, if they do exist in the brain, however they exist, and to really come up with a quotient for is understanding happening the way that like an evidence-based backed by reason and humanism in this case construct would determine that that's how understanding should happen. You look at the mental model, see the absorption of patterns and information, and then be able to deduce through those mental models, through that construct, that yes, that's how understanding is happening, and to this degree. That would be a way to quantify what has just been said. The closest we have to that is right now the ability to be able to peer into brains on a real-time basis in order to be able to see what somebody is seeing. But that's only related to vision. It doesn't really it doesn't really do anything based on what I'm sharing. But where I was going with this was about conscious experience. My laptop's gonna sleep soon. Is at the 1 hour 10-minute mark. I think there's going to be very interesting reality with conversational AIs coming on board. It's going to make the human-machine construct more fluid, more interactive, and I think it's going to reduce drudgery, because the way that we are using technology, at least from the perspective of personal computing, is largely predicated on designs from the 60s, from Douglas Engelbart, and these designs have stuck. And they're stuck for two reasons, I think. One is because they work, and secondly, because nobody's changed them. I really think so. If we had made investments in the areas of brain-machine interfaces in the 90s, and we had made solid investments, they would have matured by now. And the maturation of these areas would have entailed that computation would have been done in a much more fluid and richer way. And who's to say what would have come out as a result of that? There's always a couple of different ways you can look at developments. I'm an optimist. I believe it's all going to work out. We're going to see transformation across the board, and things are you got to work for it. It's not just going to happen if you snap your fingers. But conversational AIs would really change a lot of things, and they don't necessarily have to be conscious, although some will be conscious, and that's why I expended the better part of this 1 hour and 12-minute video on just kind of peering into the surface of that reality. I've made a separate video about cog models or cognition models and the required energy need for such a reality. I don't think that's going to be a problem in the future, but it's good to think about some of these things. Depends. I think a lot of it depends on how you architect the structure, and that's why so much of it goes back to algorithms and the ability for algorithms to be able to sift and crunch through data and make rational or objective sense out of it. So I don't know anything about that area, so I won't comment at all in those domains or realms, but maybe that's where it is all going. It's more of a art than it's a science, with all these nuances and connecting the right areas and tweaking them just the right way in order to be able to get just the right output. Being considerate that doing something has these constraints from the perspective of laws of physics, and how you work with those constraints in order to be able to get to the ideal output is one of the key whoops, my computer's gonna sleep. Oh no. Yeah, I'll end this video at this note. I'm not sure if it's going to be public, but this is some of my thoughts around conversational AIs.